Today we're going to take a break from the history of ancient Greece to discuss the ancient Greek culture. So it's divided into three parts: religion, drama, and philosophy. For religion, you see our information right here. The ancient Greeks were polytheistic. That is, they believed in many gods. You've probably heard some of these gods from popular culture. You know, they believed in Zeus and Ares and Aphrodite and the whole lot of them. These gods represented natural or human activities. So Zeus represented leadership. Zeus was also responsible for natural phenomena like lightning. Poseidon was in charge of the sea. He was also responsible for earthquakes. So the gods, again, they sort of had their particular parts of what nature or the human experience that they were responsible for, that they were associated with. They believed that they lived on Mount Olympus, and they believed that sacrifices were necessary to keep the gods happy. In the Greek religion, the gods were interested in humans a little bit, but they weren't particularly, kind or loving. They needed to be appeased, and if they weren't appeased, if they weren't obeyed, then the gods would be very nasty, and they would, cause earthquakes and stuff. Or at least, again, this was the ancient Greek belief. So it wasn't very warm and fuzzy. They believed that their gods were, a little ruthless and were quite human in their desires and their interactions with one another. And again, you see the whole bunch of them right here. There are all sorts of stories in the mythology about what the gods did and how they interacted with each other and whatnot. Those are things you can look up on your own. We don't need to go into those right here. For the drama section, it's important not to necessarily go into the plot lines of all of the ancient Greek plays, but what I would like you to know is that the origins of modern theater can be traced to ancient Greece. So the kind of plays and stuff that are put on now, or that you might participate in or watch in high school, those can sort of be traced back, at least in the Western tradition, to ancient Greece. They were performed in theaters like the one that you see here. This is a drawing of what it would look like then. This is what the sort of ruins of it look like today. They were big, open-air theaters. They were designed so that acoustically you could hear these guys down here from up here. And I've sat in theaters like this before. I've had the opportunity to sit here and watch some stuff. And you can sort of hear these people surprisingly well, because, of course, they don't have microphones back then. There are two types of plays. We don't need to get into specific plays, but there are two types of plays that were very famous that the ancient Greeks were known for: tragedies and comedies. Tragedies are serious plays about heroes who often come to tragic ends. Serious plays about heroes, they often have these, again, sort of heroic qualities, famous qualities. It's often sort of famous, legendary people. Tragedies aren't usually about regular folks and bad things happening to them. Tragedies are usually about some king or some great hero, someone who's, very exceptional, and then bad stuff happening to them. Comedies are, what a comedy is. It's a light-hearted story, but comedies are often, or at least sometimes, used to criticize society, to criticize things that people do, to criticize, negative traits that some people have, or to criticize particular famous people. That's true now, and it was true back then. And this is just, again, a drawing of what a Greek play would have looked like when they were putting it on. There were frequently masks that people would wear. All right, let's get into the densest part of the lecture, which is the ancient Greek philosophy. First, I want to just give you the definition of philosophy. Philosophy it's basically an organized system of thought. And I'll start off not with a particular philosopher, but with a group. They were called the Sophists. And the Sophists promoted skepticism, relativism. They argued that there is not ultimate truth. In other words, they're arguing that there sort of is no good, there is no bad, there's no need to worry about big issues about what is right. Really just worry about what's good for you, what's good for yourself, and that's all there is to it. So they were very sort of ruthless. And I just bring them up in the beginning because Socrates, an important part of how Socrates started is he was responding to them. He was disagreeing with them. He was saying, no, there is good, there is evil, and people should try to lead a good life. Socrates is a teacher, and he invents the Socratic Method, which is a method of teaching in which the teacher asks questions of the student, and through those questions they encourage fundamental insight into the nature of the world. That's a little bit of an esoteric definition. I'll demonstrate what it means in class. His money quote that I want you to remember is, "The unexamined life is not worth living." And what he's saying there is that thinking is the most important part of being alive. Thinking deeply about important issues is what makes life worth living. That if you live a life where you don't really think about anything and you just sort of drift from thing to thing, that's really a worthless life. So he's an intellectual, and he in fact thinks that sort of thinking about deep thoughts is the most important thing that any person can do. Again, thinks that personal development and intellectual thought is more important than materialistic things. And he criticizes the government, and he's executed for that. Now, he lives in Athens, but he lives in Athens after the Peloponnesian War. So this is after they've been defeated by Sparta. So this Athens is a very different place than it was under Pericles. It's ruled by some nasty folks. He criticizes them, and he's executed for doing that. So he doesn't come to this to a great end. His student, Plato, is the one that writes down the stories by which we know Socrates. He's a student of Socrates, but he's very famous in his own right. He's very famous for a lot of the philosophy that he wrote. In a nutshell, and again, I'm boiling down some complicated stuff here, he actually argued against democracy. He said that democracy wasn't the best idea, that the best form of government would be one ruled by philosopher kings, meaning ruled by the smartest people. That the best kind of government would be one in which the smartest people were the kings. And there's no need to have elections because then the smartest people might not get in charge. That the best way to do it would just be to have the smartest people be in charge and rule over everybody else. And then his other important insight, which gets a little complicated, so I'm just going to glaze over it, is that there's just more to the world, there's more to the universe than we can perceive with our senses. And that, in fact, that's the most important part of the universe, that with our senses we can only sort of perceive the least important things that are going on. The most important stuff is stuff that's beyond what we can just sort of see and smell and taste. Again, sort of agreeing with Socrates that thought is the most important thing. There's a little more to it than that, but we can skip that. And then the next guy up is Aristotle. Aristotle is the student of Plato. Aristotle has a very famous student, but his student doesn't choose to become a philosopher. His student goes another path, goes the political path. He is the teacher, the personal teacher of Alexander the Great, who we're going to discuss tomorrow. He is going to conquer much of the known world. So this guy is sort of the personal tutor, as well as being the smartest guy alive in his time. He's also the teacher of this great conqueror. And more than anybody else, I'm going to say that he's the guy that advanced the scientific method. That is the idea of, sort of observing things, seeing what's real by making a hypothesis and then testing that hypothesis. He's the sort of beginner of that. At this time in history, philosophy and science are all jumbled together. They haven't become disentangled yet. And Aristotle wrote on all of it. He wrote important foundational stuff on science. He wrote important stuff on government. He wrote important things on, sort of spiritual matters. He was really a guy who thought about every single thing that, is complicated and deep. I've got a quote of his on my door. Hopefully you've seen it as you've been walked into class. He's, again, a sort of a very deep, very important thinker. I'm just glazing over his main points here. But his big point that I'd like you to come away with is the quote that I have on my door, which is that we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. He believed that we are what we do. So if you want to be something, act like that thing, and then it will sort of become real through repetition, that we are sort of made up of habits, and modern psychology, sort of scientific experimental psychology bears that out. That actually is true. That the habits are quite sticky, and if you sort of do something enough, then it really becomes sort of part of who you are. Well, anyway, that is the Greek culture in a nutshell. We got our religion, our drama, and our philosophy. Thank you.